Boethius, de Fide Catholica. Ergo divina ex aeterno natura et in aeternum sine aliqua mutabilitate perdurans, sibi tantum conscia voluntate sponte mundum voluit fabricare, eunque cum omnino non esset fecit ut esset, nec ex sua substantia protulit, ne divinus natura crederetur, neque aliunde molitus est, ne iam existisse aliquid quod eius voluntatem existentia propria naturae iuvaret, atque esset quod neque ab ipso factum esset et tamen esset, sed verbo produxit caelos, terram creavit, ita ut celesti habitatione dignas caelo naturas efficeret, ac terre terrena componeret. Here is a translation. The divine nature, then, remaining from the eternal and in the eternal without any movement, by a will known only within herself, freely willed to establish order, and she made it so that it be, since there was none at all, and neither did she produce it from her own substance, lest it be believed to be divine by its own nature, nor was it built from elsewhere, lest it be believed that something already existed that, one, helped her will by the existence of its own nature, or two, be that which is without having been made from itself. For by the Logos she produced the heavens and created earth, so as to establish worthy natures from heaven as celestial dwelling, and so as to compose earthly things from earth. Now, this passage from Boethius is often read as confirming the doctrine of Creatio Ex Nihilo. Now, that doctrine is a question mark for us. It is usually assumed to mean that a divine will created the world, which is to say the universe, or everything, in fact, out of nothing. So everything comes out of nothing, or is a determination of a divine will. And aside from that will, from that divine will, there would be nothing other than the content of the will or the mysterious nature of the divine, but there would be nothing that that is in the world. There would be no world. Now, on a Platonic reading of Boethius, thus as we read Boethius as meaning more than what meets the eye on a first reading, so as we read Boethius carefully, we see that, first of all, there is a divine nature, divina natura, that this divina natura is not acting simply out of eternity, eternitas, but out of something that is eternal. And within that something which is eternal, a being. So there is divine being, or there is being as such. And this eternal being is the site where divine nature, divined nature, nature as it is divine, so nature within the eternal, within eternal being, there is nature, is acting and remains without any movement, without any motion. It is not moved. It does not move. It's immutable. Sine aliqua mutabilitate. Now we read that it is aware of its will within itself. So there is a meaning to volition that is hidden to what is outside of volition. Now, there is a spontaneous creation, right? Or a spontaneous will, rather, okay? So that the will comes out spontaneously. It is not coerced by anything else. It is free. Sponte, okay? And this will leads to the fabrication of a world. Now, this fabrication, the term here is fabricare, is a forging of world. But now, mundus in Latin means order. So there is order that is forged. There is no creatio ex nihilo in the modern sense, namely as the establishment of the being of something from nothing, as if something were the opposite of nothing, as if something were not compatible with nothing, as if the divine nature were creating the foundation, shall we say, the material foundation for the world. That is not what is being said here. That is not what Boethius is saying. He is saying that the divine mind is establishing order, mundus, not the foundation of order, not the principles of order. There is something within the divine that may be said to be the foundation of order, something in eternity, something that is proper to divine being. Now, what is Boethius' argument? And we can look at the English translation that is provided here, a translation that is an alternative to standard translations, which are here understood to be inadequate, not serious enough, not careful enough. The divine nature is a feminine, she. Neither did she produce order from her own substance. Lest it be believed to be divine by its own nature. The world does not forge itself. So the mind, the divine mind, is thinking, and that is why Boethius formulates this passage as he does, namely by speaking of intention. There is an intention in that lest, ne, in Latin. So that the divine mind is acting as it does intentionally. It produces order. Could it have done something else? Could it have acted otherwise? Or, to be more precise, since the world is forged, fabricated through the logos, that is to say, through speech, here the question is, at once, what is the best way to speak so that people understand? Lest it be believed, the mind does not wish that people believe what is not the case, namely, that the world as it is established, that the order that people find themselves in is the last word, that it somehow establishes itself. Nor was it built from elsewhere. We are not to understand that the world makes itself, that order is self-ordering, or that order comes from another order. Why not? We are not to believe, this is not conducive to awakening, to understanding, that something already existed such that, and here are the two conditions. One, it helped divine nature, and thus it helped the divine nature's will by the existence of its own nature, as if there had been another divine nature. So there is nothing aside from the divine will that supports it, that helps it, as if the divine will were not sufficiently grounded, not adequately grounded in divine nature. There is no need for another principle to come into play to help divine nature and its will to establish order. By the existence of its own nature. So there's no intervening. Existence is not just being. There's no intervening of another God, of another divine nature. There's no need for that. And to assume that is to lose oneself from the Logos. To depart from the Logos, to remain at a loss and not understand what is ultimately the case. So there's this other condition. Number two, so we read, lest it be believed that something already existed that be that which is without having been made from itself. And what is it that is without having been made from itself? Well, it's something that has been made from something else. In other words, what we would normally call, or habitually call, a created thing or a creature. So there is neither another God nor another creature or another order. Neither another orderer nor another order that supports the establishment of our order, the order of our world, right? And thus, what we're speaking about in terms of order is not one world among other worlds, or one world that evolves out of another world. To wit, there is no Big Bang that goes and tells us that, or suggests that there's another universe before our universe and a multiverse and so forth. No such thing. That does not help us understand the nature of reality. And this is where he comes in with the Logos. But, said, for in fact, and here he's rejecting those alternatives. So why is this all misleading? For it is by the Logos, by the Word, not by another God, not by another order, alien to the divine nature, but by the Logos, that of course springs forth out of the divine nature, that she, the divine nature, produced the heavens and created earth so as to establish worthy natures, etc., etc. And of course, there's a matter of composition of the earthly and establishing of the natures. So there is a forging, a fabricatio, faber, to make, to forge, of order. Is there in this passage a creatio ex nihilo in the sense of an establishment, what we usually call a creation, yes, of something out of nothing? Well, there is order, but order that, of course, does not presuppose a pre-existing order in the sense that there's nothing outside of the divine nature. There is no order outside of divine nature. So how do we understand order, ultimately? This is the question. How do we understand order? In terms of another order outside, something that has not ordered itself, and thus that is not divine? Or in terms of a divine that is not intelligible, that does not speak through the Logos? In other words, a divine that does not establish order intelligibly, reasonably, rationally, which is to say the divine as understood here by Boethius. And of course his answer is no. Order, by definition, here is established by the divine nature that is ultimately here in the eternal being, and so it is unmoved, it is intelligible, ultimately and perfectly intelligible. Boethius is thus speaking as a Platonist. So when it comes to the question of the eternity of the world, or the doctrine usually attributed to pagan philosophers such as Aristotle, suggesting that there is no creator of the universe, no transcendent God, what we are to understand here is that order has its key hidden within divine nature, or the divine mind. That the foundations of the manifest world, the manifest order, which is an order that is here said to have been brought forth or manifested. The passage in the Latin is nec ex sua substantia protulit. preferred, brought forth, manifested, or that manifests itself outwardly out of its own substance. Now, we know from Catholic or Christian doctrine that there's a distinction between the generation of Christ and the creation of the world. Now, something is fabricated or forged on the side of the world, but what springs directly forth from the divine nature is the Logos, the Son with respect to the Father in Christian doctrine. So there is no order here that is said to spring forth directly out of this substance, the divine substance. Why not? He says, why not? So that it may not be believed that that order which is before us, which is manifest, has a divine nature. If it did have a divine nature, we would not seek its source, the divine mind, whence it arises before us. So we would have an object and we would say, well, it's opaque to its source. It has no source. It's its own answer. But the world for us is a question mark. So we go back to the answer, and then, of course, the answer turns out to be an even bigger question mark, which is the divine nature. So this is all very enlightening. It is not mind-numbing insofar as it does not give us answers. It exposes us to the fundamental questions. Now, does the world have a being prior to its being manifest? Well, the answer that is more or less implicit in Boethius is yes. There is order in the respect that there is a principle of manifest order. So we have even principles, we could say, which is to say that we have the substance. What order is outside has a foundation, substance suggesting two dimensions here. What is on top and what is on the bottom, sub. So there is a bottom, a substance as in the order prior to its being manifest. It is manifested through the will. But now this will is to be understood in terms of logos. Verbo produxit caelos. The heavens are produced by the word, the verb, which is an action, of course, but action as not a physical deed, obviously. It is the articulation of a nomos, of a name, of a law. Now, this verb is the key to understanding the voluntas. This voluntas is known, so it is to be understood in terms of the mystery, for us, shall we say, the mystery of the divine nature, divina natura. How is it to be known? Well, clearly through the verb, through the word. And of course, Boethius himself is presenting these statements, and he is himself a persona, a mask of that word that speaks from eternity itself.